Hi, everyone. It's Michael Ellsberg here, and I am very excited to be interviewing today Jet Setting Jasmine, who is a kink educator internationally, as the name Jet Setting implies, and a porn performer and producer, and a licensed clinical social worker who does therapy, mostly over the phone, I believe, and also a mother. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here and doing this interview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Um, so to dive in, you wear
Mhm.
so many different hats, as I just mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit about how and when these different threads developed and kind of how they overlapped or didn't overlap at different times?
Mhm. Yeah, it's been very fluid my life in as both a therapist and a sex worker in some capacity. I did some exploring with sex work early on, coming like right out of high school and early college years, kind of living that, trying to recreate like Coyote Ugly or Players Ball or something to that effect. But I was, always in college and pursuing higher degrees towards my work in sociology, social work, and gerontology. So I always knew that these were very important aspects of my life, my sexual expression, perform opportunities for performances, and as well as being involved in therapy and helping people in the field of mental health. So they've always overlapped. I did enter the porn industry in goodness, I guess it's been about 10 years now. Yeah, 10 years ago. And that was really on the cusp as my professional career was really taking off. But I realized that it wasn't as fulfilling. I definitely needed that other element of creativity and sexual exploration. So I figured out a way to put them both together and continue to be successful.
Wow, that's super interesting because I just wrote an article about sex workers who are in academia, and so they kind
Mhm.
of start as like they'll start as sex work and then maybe start a career as a therapist or a nurse or
Right.
something. But it's less common to already have that career going
Right.
and then go into porn. Was that a
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
that a kind of challenging river to cross? Like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be putting myself out
You,
there like this, or
um, it was like kind of like a pull the band-aid off moment. It was like, what's under there, it needs to, it needs to breathe, it needs to live. And I never wanted it to be someone else's discovering of my participation in the lifestyle, my desires to be an exhibitionist and to explore my sexuality openly and publicly. I didn't want it to be some, crazy headline that
right,
let everyone know, some dirty
right,
secret, because I wasn't ashamed of these feelings and these desires at all. I did understand that they are not traditional to American culture. They're not traditional for a Black woman, for a woman with child, for all the many reasons why we're policed with how we spend our free time as professionals, with what standards we're held to that are to some extent unrealistic, and or unfair. I understood these would be potential consequences, but I was I was open for it. I
yeah,
also knew that there was a niche that would make sure for real, authentic Black sexuality, for decolonized images and media. I knew that there was a need within the porn community, so I was willing to, in essence, risk it. Um, and I did. There were some consequences. Hadn't lost not one good family member, not one good friend. However, professionally, there was some pushback. But I was able to push back with, I know my laws, the ethics. I know my boards, and I'm not behaving unlawfully. So here I am talking to you now about this journey.
yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. I am very interested in political issues around licensing and how these
Hmm.
boards
Hmm.
sometimes act very like as censorship boards and that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
as you mentioned, like because porn is legal, there is actually no, they have no codified cause of action against a porn performer.
No.
And yet I've heard that they, as you mentioned, like they do kind of frown upon sex workers. Like, is there anything
Mhm.
you can share about some of that pushback you got and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, well, I have to say that my licensure board was able to see that a claim against me was unfounded. So, that is a really great thing. I know that there are some other providers who have been held to their board, and those judgments have really come down hard on them, whether they were able to move forward and continue to practice or not. You just don't want that challenge in your professional career. However, yeah, there were lots of ways that that a person, because I guess it was someone filed a grievance against what I did in my free time, and how I was representing the profession. But there was nothing that supported misbehavior, or like you said, illegal or unprofessional behavior. I don't sleep with my clients. I don't create an extent, I don't cross their boundaries. I don't allow them to cross mine. All of the things that you would practice if you worked in a medical center or in a program, in-house program. All of the things that you would practice in those settings, I do in mine as well. And so as they were looking at these complaints, they may not have liked my decision making for my life, or the autonomy that I chose, or the openness that I choose. However, they couldn't hold me to anything that would cause me to have to relinquish my license.
So tell us a bit about your therapy practice. I understand that most of your clients are sex workers, is that right?
Hmm.
And
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. So I do see, I work with a great organization as an independent contractor for Pineapple Support. And Pineapple Support Network links sex work friendly therapists with sex workers that are in need, and will supplement some of the costs of their care. And a couple of other like organizations, including the BIPOC AIC, with much the same setup. And it's great to be able to provide virtual therapy services. And I was doing this pre-pandemic. So that was like some foresight of like how important it is for people to be able to connect with their therapists from the most comfortable, or usually the most comfortable space, the corner of their bed, their environment,
yeah.
and be able to talk about things that are really typical to the lifestyle of a sex worker, which is often as normal as anyone else's life. And we're able to kind of like quickly get into what their presenting issue is, because I'm not bringing preconceived notions or judgments about their work and how it has an impact on their lifestyle. Sex workers having a sex worker friendly, also a sex worker as a therapist, allows them to bring their full self. Many of my clients told me they've been in therapy for years and they've never disclosed the kind of work that they do, or they've hid that, they've made some other type of
Yeah.
work. And it's like, are you really getting healthcare? Can you go to your physician and not share, your external environment, external factors that are contributing to your health, and expect good treatment or comprehensive treatment? And no, the same with mental health.
Wow. I mean, imagine going to a therapist and not feeling safe to tell them not only your work, which is almost always a huge part of any therapy,
Of course.
but also the fact that your work in our current society with criminalization, stigmatization leads to a tremendous amount of stress. And you can't even tell your therapist about that. That's just, I'm so glad that there's, avenues where
Yeah.
people can. What, what are some of the issues that you see that are more unique or more common, more unique among, in particular, sex workers seeking out
Mhm.
therapy or mental health services?
You really outlined it right there, that high stigmatization, um, that constant concern and stress of if a way that you make a lifestyle is going to be interrupted by some thoughtless law, or thoughtful against you, right? Something that further marginalizes or makes it very difficult for you to do the work that you do. That's always a constant, and the way that it quite often shows up in sex workers is the difficulty in being able to take a break from work, being able to disconnect, because of that need to earn in case of interruption in income. As of late, for many obvious reasons, with the global impact on finances, it's having a trickle down effect on people who purchase entertainment. And then as well as not being able to go to strip clubs and all the many places that, sex workers are involved in, modeling, media, all of these shooting. Um, so that is definitely having an impact. And I think those are very parallel to what we're seeing with most small business owners or entrepreneurs. However, it's so stigmatized. We're unable to apply for certain types of loans and resources. It can become really, really difficult for sex workers during this time for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So as you've stated, and I'll make sure our readers know, like, you don't provide sex work or physical touch or anything like that in your therapy sessions. You follow, of course, the standard guidelines. And a lot of sex workers I've read and talked and heard and say, like, this is almost like therapy. Like, I'm kind of acting like a pseudo therapist for my clients. Now, other sex workers I've read say, look, we don't want to be seen that way. It puts an expectation on us. It creates this expectation for a kind of intimacy that we isn't what it's about. This is entertainment. But I've definitely heard other sex workers say, like, no, I really feel like I'm helping my clients. Like, I'm helping them work through things that they actually haven't been able to work through in talk therapy. So do you think, like, what do you think about some of the crossovers, differences and similarities between healing therapy work and sex work?
Absolutely. I definitely think there's a lot of intersections, and a lot of it is based on style, personality, and skill set. I think that sex workers across the board are so diverse in how they want to provide their service, how they see their service, whether it's camming or shooting content or doing dominatrix work or fetish work, hands-on live sex work, in-person sessions, whatever it is, they have a style, whether they treat that as a creative art that they just want to share and be done, or if it is a transference of energy, so to speak, between them and their client. Some are very much like, this is a time that I am at work and this is a service that I provide, and then I don't want to do any emotional labor. And I think that a range of that is great, even from day to day, moment to moment, act to act, for sex workers to be able to honor those boundaries that they feel at that moment with that client, with whatever activity that they're doing. Um, I think giving that range, I think there's like this idea of you have to be one way or the other. And I really think we should interact with our clients the way we do with anyone else, based on what they're bringing to the table and what it is that we hope to accomplish with them. Now, that being said, I know that a lot of sex workers feel like they don't have anywhere to refer their clients that may need a higher level of support, emotional labor, that more professional labor that needs to go into it. And so they take it on because they do develop relationships with their clients, even in that professional setting. I will give an example outside of sex work so that maybe our audience can have something that's relatable. I kind of take it as like a bar patron and a bartender relationship.
Right.
It's like you hold space for your
Yeah.
patrons, right?
Yeah.
You learn about their life. You don't just say like, "Hey, dude, drink the beer, keep that to yourself," right? You might say,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, sorry to hear that."
Exactly.
And if bartenders could say like, "Hey, dude, that's really heavy. I'm sorry you're going through that. I want you to talk to my guy Michael. He is great about talking to these kind of problems about." And you know that Michael isn't going to shame him for being a drunk at the bar or something like that. Like, that's the kind of relationship that sex workers, therapists, and clients can really have in a healthy way. I look at sex workers as like first responders of emotional care. Who do people go to in the middle of the night? Highly accessible, affordable, and non-judgmental. Sex workers, not
Right.
therapists, unfortunately.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And therapists usually aren't available at 1 a.m. So
Nope.
yeah.
I know I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that analogy, the bartender. I use a similar one of the hairdresser, right? I mean, I think
Yeah. Oh
most
my
hairdressers
goodness.
should be paid double because they're like therapists and hairdressers, you know?
Oh my goodness. Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
perfect analogy as well.
yeah. So you mentioned, a sex worker referring to a therapist. I'm really curious about the other direction. Let's say that we lived in a society where sex work was not criminalized, where it was not
Right.
stigmatized. Could you see a society where a therapist could say, look, it's not appropriate for me to work on this issue with you directly. However, I think you would
Mhm.
benefit from actually learning about this thing, and going to see a sex worker. And here's a list of people that I trust and that my clients have gotten good results with. Like, could you see something like that happening?
Wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. We do this all the time. We help our clients learn how to date. We help our clients learn how to experience all types of things that might bring them anxiety, or if they feel that they are not well versed enough to have confidence in, or to reframe trauma, for example. We do this modeling is huge in therapy. That's one of the main components that we use. It's just that when it gets into the realm of sex and our thoughts about sex that is not traditional in the sense of culturally, like for monogamous relationships, right, or relationship based sex, or only casual sex if you're like what, 21 and younger, and like all of these different very, very clear boxes that we have as a society for how we're allowed to have sex. And sex for wellness, sex for health is not one of those boxes that's often explored or given as an option to clients. I use that method all the time. I don't use sex surrogates because of honestly the lack of access that I have to them in terms of having shared values. However, I use CAM models all the
Mm,
time. It's a great way to help clients connect, practice communication, practice listening. It's an opportunity for them to learn how to communicate their needs and actually see them actualized.
mm.
It's fantastic. It's all the work that there's no way in the world I can do
Yeah,
ethically,
right,
right? Or even a desire, or even
right.
appropriately. My clients, they are start to understand what it is that they like about certain attributes of a person, and it's just a way of exploring that is consensual. Again, it's legal, and there is a benefit to both parties involved. It's not like sending someone out dating and they're practicing on
Right,
people.
right.
It's totally appropriate to tell a cam model, hey, I want to practice for an hour flirting with you. um
Yeah,
that's what we do,
right.
so I definitely use and strongly support sexual surrogacy. I understand the labeling and how
Yeah,
stigmatization and criminalization, so I allow people to label themselves accordingly. But the exchange of sex for any type of compensation is how I define sex work,
yeah.
and I'm really proud of that term.
So let's step out of your therapist hat for a moment and into your kink
Okay.
educator hat.
Hmm.
Um, do you feel like when you're teaching kink, you're not, in that case, you're not a therapist. You don't have a clinical or kind of healing relationship with your
Sure.
student or your clients. But have
Hmm.
you seen healing effects from people learning about their fantasies, learning about kink? Like, have you seen kink and BDSM
Oh
be a
yeah.
healing force, and how
Oh,
so? Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it's important to say in both of my works, it's almost impossible to take the skill set, the knowledge, and even like the new personality and nuances from one and not into the other. There's definitely always some overlap that's coming through, even if it is like, okay, this session is going south. I need to put that dominatrix on in me and and bring it into therapy and ground us. So there is always an overlap, but in the kink space, I mean, healing can be found anywhere, and because it is often, when done right, structured. There are rules of engagement. Consent is at the key. It is perfectly okay to observe before participating. There's some level of mentorship and guidance, and all of the things that we had don't get in regular sex ed or in vanilla sexual experiences. So the BDSM world often allows for people to feel safer to explore themselves sexually and to present as who they are, whether that's submissive or dominant or a switch or all the many different play categories that they are. So you really get to see people feel experience healing because they're in their most authentic self oftentimes when they are in these kink spaces. I love that. I love seeing people say for the first time someone asked me if they could touch me in a public space, um, and that feeling incredibly empowering. Or I was able to use my safe word and the person actually stopped. And this has not been my experience. And that coming from someone who has experienced sexual trauma is huge. And I can't give that experience in a therapeutic setting.
Right.
So, and I mean, really, to be able to see a client have that hands-on experience and see it register, or see a person experience that in a kink setting and see it register. The therapist in me does definitely light up. Like there's so much value in these spaces.
Right. Yeah. And it's complicated too, because you'll hear a lot of BDSM people say like, this is not therapy, this is, and it's true, it's not, right? But they're like very
Yeah.
skeptical of this idea that like this should be a healing thing. But I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen people have profound healing experiences when they accept some thing that's always been in their shadows and they see that it's actually
Hmm.
like they can actually have it be a source of turn on, or like you said, they
Yeah,
actually learn how they kind of re-engage with certain material that was traumatic in the past, but learn how to be in the driver's seat around it.
that's
um,
right. A couple of things come to mind briefly when you say that. It is one there. If all things can be therapeutic, right? Like
yeah,
it doesn't have to necessarily have like a license and a certificate attached to it. There is a form of therapy, psychotherapy, but anything can be therapeutic if you deem and define it that way. I do think that when sometimes people say that, there's also like this removal of responsibility and liability for someone's emotional and mental health in those spaces, which I think is just as important as someone's physical safety. And then finally, we also have to think about how the mental health community has treated the BDSM and fetish community. It was not very long ago that many of the things that we enjoy to play with was in this book, the DSM. It
right,
wasn't very long ago that even homosexuality was in this book considered for disorders. So
right.
when there's some distancing, there's also some history there. And again, it's like another reason why our mental health community has to really shore up and and prove that it is ready to support other styles of other lifestyles, in a way that make people feel safe and even want to associate with mental health.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about porn now, another one of
Okay.
your areas. So what's your intention around the porn you create? Why do you create it? What
Mhm.
change you want to see in the world with it?
Our intention is to show people actually wanting to do the things that they're doing on camera and to actually allow the performers to direct the directors, based on what it is that they enjoy and what it is that they want to bring to the camera, not what they're known for, what
Hmm.
they are enjoying that day, that
Hmm.
that like an hour before. I know we talked about this, but I'm feeling a little bit of this. Okay, cool. Let's make that happen. That's the very essence of Royal Fetish Films. We started it because was throwing these parties, these fantasy flight parties, and it kept coming up. Like, why don't you guys do porn? Like, you're so hot together and all that kind of stuff. King was already in the industry a couple of years prior, and left it because it wasn't not a very nice industry. Um, and people were saying like we would watch more porn if we saw people like you that look like us, that were into the things that we were into, that weren't stereotyped, um, and that could speak in a way that we are used to speaking and want to communicate about sex, that could model what sex looks like when you're actually talking about it before doing it and or after doing it. And so I was just like, yeah, like I'd watch more porn too. And
Yeah.
we filmed this thing super organically. We were with a submissive on a trip, and we woke up one morning and we were like, get the camera. And we just had like this morning sex, and it was so natural, no makeup, no heels, no crazy lighting. And I was like, that that's it. Like I would watch it. And it wasn't just like an arrogant, like, oh gosh, Jazz, you look so hot. It was like two Black people kissing and being romantic and authentic. And I was like, I need to see that. So there must be someone else that needs to see their body represented, their love, their sex. And we put it out there. We just like push submit. And we were right. Like people do want to see, well put together pieces that center the actors and the actresses, not this idea of what the person on the other side of the camera wants to see. We put the camera in the hands of women. We allow them to show us, the parts of the body that they would actually like to see. Um, I love seeing how the body reacts outside of the genitalia. Like to me, sex is a full body experience, so I want to see the full body. That's what you'll see in a lot of the films that I direct. I want to see Black bodies lit well, so that our full beauty is brought to film. Key and I, it's really important that that chemistry is there. If it's not, then it doesn't need to happen. We're creating art. We're not just creating something for people to jerk off to. It's like, of course, like we want you to do that too, right? We want you to
Yeah.
have a good time, a great sexual experience, but we also want you to remember it.
Yeah.
The fact that you can share with me how it made you feel, then that to me is the essence of art for me, is that it evokes a feeling from my audience. So that's what we're doing. And we were told that people don't want to see Black kink, that Black people aren't into kink, that our films would not sell, that people don't want to see people of the same complexion together. And we have not missed a meal since, so they were wrong, and I'm glad
Yeah.
we followed our intuition.
Yeah. No, it's really beautiful what you've done there.
Thank you.
On that last note that you brought up around Black kink. So I research a lot, kind of the ideological other side of SWERFs, sex worker, exclusionary radical feminists who are
Mhm.
very much against porn and sex work, as you know. So I read a
Sure.
book once, I think it was in the 80s, and it was a book called Against Sadomasochism, and it was all the typical SWERF arguments about the sexualizes violence and these kind of things. Um, and there was an essay by a Black woman saying, any participation in BDSM is white supremacy because it's eroticizing the tools of slavery and collars and whips and these kind of things. And I can see why she might think that.
Mhm.
Obviously, you see it another way. So I'd be curious to
Mhm.
hear your response to kind of the
Yeah.
intersections of this critique that BDSM like sexualizes slavery.
Mhm. Mhm. So what triggers one is a trigger and it's valid. So, for someone to have those strong emotional feelings to seeing some of the items that we use in a BDSM setting, and feel that connection to slavery, that is the very essence of a colonized sex. That your sexual exploration is limited by that white supremacy. So I definitely can see that argument wholeheartedly. We work really hard to help redefine sexuality, so to help heal those generational traumas around sex and sexuality. Now it goes much bigger than collars and some of those items. Those items are innocent. It is what was done with those items that pose the issue, right? It's the fact that those items were put on people without consent, and those people that were shackled were not. It was not. They weren't considered people, and there was no consideration. And that is what is the misunderstanding around BDSM, and where it intersects and gets very, very complicated for people of color. Also added to that, it's sex exploration is not something that's a privilege. I think that I need to state it that way. For Black and Brown people, we're given a very small window of what our sex and sexuality is supposed to look like, determined by society. When you think of a Black woman and you think of stereotypes of our sex or how sex has been taught and sold to us, it is this very salacious, very aggressive, and often incredibly objectified version of us, and even a caricature of us. Same for Latinx women. They are, I can go on and on and on about
Right.
the stereotypes that are permeated through sex. So when you actually want to explore feeding into it, oh my goodness, like how, and there becomes that cognitive dissonance. I really want to enjoy that, but I'm not allowed to. I've never seen anyone like me engage in that way. The only time I've ever seen a Black person be whooped was in a way that was directly regarding violence and violence towards them because they were Black. So we try really hard to demonstrate and also talk about the psychological impacts that's involved, as well as the physiological and physical impact that things like impact play give. What a relief it is just not to have to make a decision, and how we can, like, as Black women who are always like having to like be on top of everything, how nice it might be to not have to think for an hour when you're with your dom. And how that could be a very different type of relationship than what you may think of as this like master and slave idea. You get to redefine that in kink. So that's kind of how I approach a lot of these conversations about what decolonizing sex is. It is really allowing you to redefine what you want that to look like, and it may include some whips and chains, or it may not, and that's okay too. You could still be kinky without those items if they're triggering to you.
Yeah. Yeah. We hear a lot about how in the media about how watching and masturbating to porn supposedly makes people worse lovers. And I'm sure in some cases or many cases that can be true. But have you seen instances where watching porn actually benefits somebody, makes them a better lover, and like educates them? I mean, people say, oh, well, kids learn about sex from porn, and obviously underage people should not be viewing
Sure.
porn. It's not meant for underage
Hmm.
people. And let's say an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, like where exactly else are they going to learn about, this fantasy that they had? Like a lot of people explore, queer fantasies that they have no context for in their small town,
Exactly.
or
Hmm.
they have some fetish that they're really ashamed about, and then they can actually see people enjoying that fetish, and see it
Yeah.
de-shamed, and so I feel like it can be a very positive force, and that side gets
Oh,
very
yeah.
little airtime in the media. So
Oh, absolutely. It is. I mean, it's the only form of media that you can see almost any body type. And I'm not saying that it's always presented in the most respectful and uplifting way. I'm just saying, like, visually, you can
yeah.
see any body type engaging, and different body types and
Right.
abilities, and
Right.
doing different things. So yeah, we are definitely going to. And then the other thing too is, if you're even just looking to read something about something you're experiencing, you're going to come across it, and that visual is likely going to pull you in. So I do think 100% that porn has value. It's just, if when it's misused, or when we're not defining for ourselves what our goals are with porn,
Right.
it could be potentially problematic.
Right, exactly. Another thing that's really interesting about your story and the mix of things you have going on is that you are fairly open about, you use your stage name for your kink and porn, you use your legal name for your therapy, and you don't like, they're different names for different things, but you're
Hmm.
open about, this is my legal name.
Yes.
And for good reason. Most sex workers keep those things like really, really separate,
Hmm.
especially if they're
Hmm.
operating in a professional context like
Sure.
therapy or medicine, where they could be kicked out. What's been your,
Hmm.
like, was that an intentional decision to say, like, look, I'm not going to hide, this is my legal
Hmm.
name, I'm not going to try to hide it from you? And what's been your experience having your legal name, someone, you know,
Mhm.
one or two steps away from your porn name
Your
and so forth.
my
Yeah.
performer name.
Yeah.
hmm Yeah, it was. I mean, this has been a journey. I have been Jet Setting Jasmine, the brand, for 10 years now, and I wasn't doing quite all the things that I'm doing now at the start.
Right. Right.
But there was, I do recall probably like maybe 3 or 4 years in when I was like, oh, maybe we should do like change the LLC to like doing business as like, I don't know, Jet Setting Michael or something, right? I was just like,
Yeah.
maybe I should really, and I kept getting drawn towards, am I addressing my shame? Like, am I address like why am I trying to, I got into this to be comprehensive within self, right? Like to experience all aspects of me. And then when I got to that point of like, yeah, like, you know, your life is awesome, you're doing all the things you want to do, then I'm trying to pull it back apart. And that I was really having again that cognitive dissonance, like you're thinking one thing but you're doing something different. And I decided to, yes, be intentional. If this journey was about my sex and sexuality as a full human being that has a society acceptable role, that is a mom, that is a partner, that's in this poly relationship, that's doing these things, if that's what this is about, make it about it. And if the challenges come, monetize those problems. And
Yeah.
we live in a society where people's real challenges can be monetized, where people's real life experiences are considered our highest paid of entertainment, right? Reality shows and so I kind of went with that. Like, it is going to come with some challenges, and that closeness is going to require a lot of heavy security and scrutiny and things of that sort. But I'm willing to do that because I get to be my full self. I don't have to complicate things and decide who I'm going to be that day. What do I need to tell this person and not that person? And like I said, I never wanted to be outed by anyone.
Right.
If I do it myself, I get to tell the narrative. Like having this interview
Totally.
with you, these are my words. This is not someone saying, "Can you believe?" You know.
Right. No,
So I chose to write my own narrative.
that is so smart. You got out ahead of the story.
Yeah.
So there's not
There
this
you
big
go.
like expose, therapist outed as sex, or, you know, you're just like, hey,
Yeah.
this is who I am. What are you going to do about it? Like, yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
that becomes the story, and that's
Yeah.
pretty cool,
And now, yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Last question. I know that you and King Noir teach some workshops around like talking with kids around porn. I think that's so important because
Mhm.
it's this double whammy where, because like parents are so afraid of sex and porn, and we live in this culture where, you know, it's presumed that children and teenagers don't have any sexuality, even a totally appropriate sexuality. And then so that there's all that secrecy, and then kids are finding like hardcore porn at 13, and it's like
Mhm.
you can't even talk to them and do any kind of contextualization. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, just your thoughts in general about you know, talking to kids about porn, and
Mhm.
B, like if there's anything you want to share about maybe how, if you talk to your kids about your work, and how you might do that.
Mhm. Yes. So that's a huge issue for us, or huge area for us. We lead a portion of our brand towards porn and parenting. It's on social media as sex positive parenting and porn and parenting. It's already been knocked off of Instagram because society doesn't want us
it, it's like
parenting our children about sex.
it makes me so angry, because it's like, okay, look, I understand, you know, I don't agree with it, but I understand you don't want actual porn on your social media. That's your
Yeah,
choice,
I
fine.
get
But
it.
you're saying because it's dangerous, and you're going to kick people off who actually want to educate other people about how to reduce the harms in society around this thing. It's like, it's mind-boggling to me the way they kick sex
Yeah.
educators off these platforms.
It's it. It's insane. So what we decided is we have three children. King and I have a 20-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old daughter, and a 2-year-old son. And since I decided that I was going to go into visual media and put, X-rated media, and knowing that my kids, kids are actually accessing porn as young as age 8 now. So it was definitely like we're going to run into each other online, and let's do the things that we need to do to prevent it. And before even doing that, let me share with you what decision I'm going to be making about my body and the things that I'm going to do and how it may have an impact on you as my daughter, or my daughters, and how we will figure out how to work through that. But this is the decision that I'm making. That's kind of what the conversation was over time. It started with like me hosting the poll parties and having toys and being like, girls, this is mommy's bag of adult toys. I don't bother with your toys. Do not bother with mine. And making it clear adults have items that are for them, and this is how you respect my boundaries like I respect yours. And so as I started to get further and further along, as King and I started to become more popular, we keep having these conversations with our children about our lifestyle, about being in an open relationship, and it being our choice, and respecting whatever their decisions will be when they are at the decision making age, and how we want them to respect us as full humans. So that has been kind of how we've personally contextualized our work and parenting. As far as teaching our children about sex, it people always say like what age, and it's from birth to dirt. Like as until I go into the dirt, I will always be teaching my children anything that I feel like I can. So with our son, who's 2 years old, it's teaching him the anatomically correct words of his body, not shaming him when he like points and goes like mommy's boobies, like it's okay. These are mommy's breasts. Would you like to feed right now? Not, normalizing breastfeeding and things of that sort when your body is sexualized and when it's not, and that being up to you. Teaching our kids about privacy, even at 2. You can touch yourself however you want in the bathtub. But when we're at grandma's house on the couch, like, can you keep your hands out of your pamper? Right. So those kind of conversations. My daughter, the 16-year-old, how she's exploring dating, what emotional things might come up, how you're going to manage having sex and maybe the person not wanting to talk to you anymore. So even exploring what breakups are like, because a lot of times we place so much focus on like sex, sex, sex. The worst part of sex was the fact that you're not going to have it again with that person sometimes. And with the 20-year-old, she is in a monogamous long-term relationship. And, just the other day, we were talking about the silent treatment. And I was like, oh, y'all are getting serious.
Mhm.
So navigating kids, sex, and relationships and intimacy from the very as early as possible, and normalizing these conversations. We use music, WAP that just came out with Cardi, Wet Ass Pussy, and Megan Thee Stallion. I get silly with the kids. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, what if you don't have a WAP? Like, does that make you bad? And they're just like, oh gosh, mom, like they're just kidding. It doesn't matter. And it gives us these opportunities for them to pull me into what they're learning, what they need to shore up their learning about. And it also gives them an opportunity to know that I am perfectly open to talking with them about anything. And if I don't know, I will find a resource, or we'll figure it out, Google it, slow the lyrics down together. These are how we coach other parents. We coach therapists with how to have these conversations with parents about porn, sex, and sexuality. Our oldest daughter is now a public speaker on the topic of being a daughter of porn entertainers,
Oh, wow.
as well as what it was like. Yeah, so she's dope, daughter of a porn entertainer.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. Wow.
and she also co-presents with us on what it's like growing up in a sex positive household, so that parents can hear, and other young adults can hear from a child's perspective, how having these awkward sometimes, uncomfortable sometimes, but always important conversations have had an impact on, like, she says things as a 20-year-old that I still don't think I could say to my mother without feeling like I broke her heart. And I am a 40-year-old porn performer. And so that stigma and that shame and that judgment, it holds many, generations oftentimes if we choose not to break it. And so my family is really an example of breaking those generational traumas of having shame and or no place to talk about sex and sexuality in your household.
Mm. Wow. Thank you so much for the work that you
Yeah,
do, and with your partner, King
thank
Noir. I
you.
just think you're really at the cutting edge of integrating all these different threads around, kink and porn and education and therapy and healing. So yeah, just thank you for the work.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for highlighting it, for researching it, and being a part of our community.